hello. Welcome to the show. Thank you, John Carroll, for singing me in today and every day. He is the best. Go follow him on Twitter at JDCarroll88 and check out all of his music and buy at johncarroll.org, 2 R's, 2 L's. Thank you very much for joining me today, everybody. I've got two awesome guests, Clint Watts and Christian Finnegan. Because it's Fridays, we got a new jingle intro from Pete Coe for Christian, which is a lot of fun, and we had an awesome conversation. Great conversations with both these guys, and I'm just going to get right to it because no news Friday, because we had the hangout on Thursday night, which is every Thursday night. Welcome to all the new subscribers this week. It's been a hell of a week of shows. I've got so much good feedback from you, and I really appreciate it, but it's also been a very exhausting week, a lot going on in my life, and so I am going to get to the guests and get some rest this weekend. Come back fired up for you on Monday. I'm going to have Maura Quint. I've got next week Celeste Headley, Rich Louv, who, of course, came up with vitamin N, and one of my favorite authors of all time. Also, Barry Ritholtz set to join me, and much, much more next week. So very excited about that. But right now, let's get to my first guest, shall we? Of course, like I said, Christian Finnegan coming up. But first, national security expert Clint Watts. He's now with the Foreign Policy Research Institute, former Army, former FBI, author of the book Messing with the Enemy, Surviving in a Social Media World of Hackers, Terrorists, Russians, and Fake News. Another great conversation with Clint. He's on Twitter at Selected Wisdom. You see him on MSNBC, where he's a national security contributor to NBC News all the time. And guess what? He's here for you because of you and your support for this podcast. If you haven't subscribed, do it now. Go to standupwithpete.com, give a review and a rating to the podcast. Put that on your to-do list for this week. All right. Well, there he is, the great Clint Watts at Selected Wisdom. Been on TV a lot lately. There's a lot for you to talk about. But I want to just start with the anniversary of September 11th, along with the pullout of Afghanistan, and simply ask you, because I think I tweeted with you about this real briefly, what is your concern about a terrorist threat from Afghanistan now that the American military has gone?
There's always going to be one. I don't know that it's even the most dangerous one internationally right now. I think the closer you are to the holy sites in Saudi Arabia, and you have a safe haven, so Iraq, Syria, Yemen, even in Saudi, those places tend to concern me more, always have. ISIS has just melted, into Syria. U.S. military is now there. Things seem to be okay. I'm not saying they will be okay forever, but I'm just trying to put some, comparison to Afghanistan currently. The assumption is like, we were in Afghanistan to keep al-Qaeda at bay. Not really true after about 2005.
Right.
We were there because we had this fantasy of rebuilding the government, and we left, and we'll always have to have some sort of counterterrorism work being done there, with partners or allies and technical and geospatial, whatever it's going to be. But I don't feel that it is any more dangerous than other spots around the world, which we just don't even talk about,
right,
on a daily basis.
But just to the argument that we've heard for almost 20 years about the safe haven, that drives me nuts, Clint, because they don't need a training, they don't need a camp, they just need an internet connection, which you know all about.
Yeah, so it's a snowball, right? You got to get it started somewhere. So usually one of these groups, whether it's ISIS, which became the Islamic State, or Al Qaeda, which became a lot of different affiliates, to pull off the really successful attack, you need some sort of hub somewhere where a core cadre can kind of put the ideas together, start putting things in motion. Once that happens, then the snowball, it rolls itself, right? Then once they move to the internet, once they network, from there, you can really see it start to spider web out. And it's almost impossible to say, like, this is where Al Qaeda is at. It's everywhere technically, but it's one person in one country and 10,000 people in another country, right? So those networks are really, they're amorphous and expansive, and they change all the time. So the Islamic State right now is popping up in a lot of African countries, but they weren't there 5 years ago. So the terrorist threat kind of goes where it can. There's always safe havens around the world, and they'll move to wherever that safe haven is. It's more that you got to keep an ability to watch and interdict in each of those safe havens. Afghanistan is just one of them.
It would seem that the incentives for the jihadist type terrorist groups are more limited to creating caliphates and taking control of regions or entire countries, and, living out whatever their prophecy is, as opposed to attacking American homeland or American interests because they don't want to attract the American might of the American military. Is that, I know it's a lot more complicated than that, but we're just, you can have as much nuance as you want, but what are the incentives of these organizations at this point in time?
Yeah, so the Al-Qaeda strategy, so to speak, and I'm simplifying it, we could go on for hours about this, but it was attack the United States, pull them into a global conflict, then the Muslim society will rise up to fight the evildoers, so-called Americans, and then that will unify all Muslims, and that didn't really happen. And instead what you saw happen was the Arab Spring toppled dictators, was the idea of democracy and sort of populism. That also didn't work, well over time. Those started to collapse into chaos because they didn't really have a long-term strategy. Social media mobilization, as we saw on January 6th, great for near-term events from the opponent's standpoint, not real good for strategizing and organizing to long-term goals. Like, you got to have both. The Islamic State, ISIS, they were the opposite. They said the time is now to build our emirates, which is a small Islamic state, like a province, think of it that way, or a caliphate, which is the actual Muslim state they were trying to build. They said, no, we don't need to wait anymore. We can do it now. So let's go local and let's do it everywhere we can. And this is what you hear referring to as ISIS-K, which is kind of that's wrong, by the way. It should be ISIK, Islamic State in Khorasan. ISIS is the Islamic State in Al-Sham, which is Syria. So it's a little bit, the horse is out of the barn at this point. It doesn't matter. But the idea that there is a Islamic State in Khorasan in Afghanistan, they'll try and do the same thing, but they also need to gain notoriety. And the best way to gain notoriety is to get a spectacular terrorist attack, suicide bomber at the gates of the airport. That draws the young audience in. That gets them excited that they're taking on the West. So, and at the same time, the Taliban, who is their enemy. So it's a complicated stew. But ultimately, I'm with you, Pete, that why wouldn't they be focused on China, who is detaining Muslim Uyghurs, or Russia, who is always conducting some sort of war against Islamic extremists, and many of the stands, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, and Chechnya. There are a lot of other states out there. We're not the only thing that's out there anymore.
I feel like personally, my credibility on covering national security issues and foreign terrorist threats is pretty solid. I've been doing it for a long time. I was in New York on 9/11, and yet on the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Clint, I wrote a tweet. I sent a tweet. I posted a tweet. I think I got like 6 likes. But the point was, on the 20th anniversary of 9/11, I still can't believe we haven't investigated deeper Russia's interference into the 2016 election. Like, we know so much about 9/11. We had the 9/11 Commission, which is plenty to criticize about that. We have sent the military all over the world to fight the foreign jihadist threat. To me, the much larger issue now, and potentially, outside of the horrific loss of human life, was the fact that Russia interfered in our election. You've been studying, talking, and working on this issue and this threat, as well as many others, for a long time. And yet, the news cycle moves on and we don't think about it. But what do you think of just the idea? And I know you try to, work it in when possible, of 2016 and really not coming to any kind of conclusion, investigation, much less action to dissuade Russia or any other foreign country from interfering in our elections.
Yeah, it's strange. So I wrote a reflective post, and I didn't post it on 9/11 because I just knew there was going to be tons of them, and I also wasn't sure how well received it would be. But it was kind of like how silly some of the presumptions were on after 9/11, like that terrorists could really topple the United States of America. That was never going to happen. Anytime we're met by foreign invaders or foreign occupiers, the British or Al Qaeda or whoever, right? The U.S. tends to bind together and we rally really strong. We always have, Pearl Harbor. You can pick any of those sorts of moments. It's interesting. The only way America will ever fall will be because of Americans and because of divisiveness of Americans. And that's what the Russians tapped into and understood. You cannot win by invading North America, right? But you can convince a lot of Americans to exit the United States of America or to fight other Americans, entice them to degrade their democracy. And that was their idea. Went through the force of politics rather than the politics of force, like go into their population and convince them to fight themselves. And when you look at it, they definitely did that. They are not the only part of it, but now that is kind of the internal divide in our country, which really does threaten our democracy. And they understood that.
So let me ask you then, turn to the domestic threat. By this will post on Friday, and on Monday we'll know what happened in Washington, D.C. this weekend. But there's a rally planned to support the insurrectionists. And I just want to get you on the record, as you have been, to talk about your concerns there. There are a lot of people, including yourself, that were really concerned about January 6th. I always hate it when, officials, national security officials kept saying, well, no one thought this was going to happen. We didn't know it was going to happen. It's like, I knew it was going to happen.
I think most people thought it was going to happen. Yeah. I didn't know anybody who was that shocked that had been paying attention.
Right. So what do you think about this weekend? How concerned are you about this rally in D.C. this weekend? They're putting the gates back up, but the analysts I've been reading, including you, I feel like are not too concerned about people. How many people are the violence?
No, I'm not worried. Look, there'll be some sort of rally. It'll mostly be peaceful, and that's part of the plan. I think is that they have gotten their base fired up again, right, about a potential rally. Everyone's talking about them. They are rewriting the narrative of January 6th, right, justice for J6, that, these are political prisoners. So they're winning there with their narrative. And I think the third part, which people haven't really gotten to yet, but I think will come is, look, these are just peaceful protests. This was a peaceful protest about January 6th. January 6th, those guys were tourists. It was a peaceful protest. They're going to use this as sort of like an example of we're just peaceful. And they'll use that to try and rewrite history to a degree. There won't be many people show up. If anything, I think I'm more worried about state and local municipal buildings, state capitals. There are rallies around the country. Those are a little more worrisome because there's just less intelligence. There's less people to deal with it. You can really get caught off guard. And it's not necessarily their fault. Sometimes that can be a security force of 6 people, right, or 7 people. It's just really tough to defend. And then I have to say, on the white supremacist end, it's been the Afghan refugees. Watching that conversation kick up and talks about refugee centers, that I think is that lone wolf or small cell attack, a mass shooting or open killing of immigrants, that sort of thing. I'm still really terrified about that. I don't know when it'll happen. It may not. I hope I'm wrong, but it seems like there's a lot of talk about it.
To be clear, you're referring not to the refugees being terrorists, but someone else attacking them.
Correct. Someone attacking the
American
refugees.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the white supremacist conversations around Afghan refugees right now are just awful. And so that fits a narrative, right? This is that nationalism meets, the Afghan war and the end of it. It's a very convoluted sort of series of events. And you got these refugees who are just desperate to get out of their country, which we left. And, they could be vulnerable here in the U.S. It's a kind of a sad moment. Yeah,
you shared that. I hadn't heard much about that at all. I was talking to a listener yesterday whose husband is in the Air Force or he still works in the base in New Mexico, where they've got 3,000 refugees. And it was a really fascinating conversation to hear about how the community is dealing with it and how the base is dealing with it. I saw in your Twitter feed that you had shared, like, the Proud Boys have created some kind of a sticker or badge, like Afghan refugee hunting permit. And it's, that's the only thing I've really heard or seen. I have not been paying attention to those white supremacists and what their plans are, at least what they're saying. The chatter is about the Afghan refugees. So that's pretty upsetting to hear.
Well, there's a weird split. The refugee issue cuts in strange ways. You've seen communities, Republicans and Democrats coming together, leaning that way, helping out, in certain communities. You've also got a lot of former military members, who may have sympathies towards militia groups, but also served in Afghanistan and know those people, right? They served with them. And so they're sympathetic to helping their transition back to the U.S. So it's not as straightforward. I think these are the classic white supremacist young online folks that want to kill people, right? And this is their target of the day that they're sort of choosing.
I think it's exhausting to have to talk about certain commentators on a regular basis, but Tucker Carlson is easily one of the most influential people in America. And night in and night out, he's talking about, for several nights, he's talking about these refugees are being brought in to create votes for Democrats, to replace Americans. And that kind of thing on the most watched cable news network it's not like some fringe thing that you got to go into the dark web to watch. It's so influential and so terrifying, that kind of rhetoric. But I bet you it's really working.
Oh, I'm sure it is. And this is consistent with the Daily Caller, other publications he's been associated with. As you know, Breitbart's, Steve Bannon's War Room, all of those sorts of things they're unified in that message, which is interesting because at the same point, there were times when the Bannons and then we're all for getting us out of Afghanistan, but they don't really offer any solutions to any of these things. It's mostly the hypocrisy of the turmoil.
Well, there's not, because they're not about solutions. They're about ratings.
Yes.
They don't care about actual anything. They only care about getting ratings and getting, that's it. And I think Steve Bannon's more of an ideologue, but still he's about being popular. And so let me ask you then about some of the outcomes, some of the things we're hearing about this new book, Woodward and Bob Costa. Book's called Peril. You've weighed in on this. It's so fascinating to see a whole bunch of Twitter analysts and pundits, calling this treason. Even Sonny Hostin, who is a lawyer on The View, calling it treason. I'm like, watching the women on The View talk about this is like, no, don't talk about these things without a guest. Bring a guest on that can help you understand the protocols. You and Tom Nichols and a lot of other people on Twitter are explaining. Which is why I don't have a hot take, because I don't know how this shit works. If you don't know how this shit works, stop talking about it. So what do you think of the claims of being made about Milley and contacting his Chinese counterpart and accusations of treason, which are coming from across the board, Republicans and some Democrats?
I think it's overbaked. I do. I just think it's so traditionally, just to put some context around it.
Yeah.
Anytime there's a presidential transition, the services go up in alert status and sort of they watch, because if you're a foreign adversary to the United States, a great time to do anything against the U.S. is while this transition is underway, either at the end of one president's term or the start of the next one. So because they're not on their feet or they're not paying attention. And so it's a great time to kind of whack the new administration to see how they would react, or the old administration on the out to kind of get what you want and jam the transition, right? So that's an opportune time. And so these sorts of exchanges oftentimes are routine before and after. That's part one. The second part is, this is not like some surreptitious phone call where General Milley calls a Chinese general and goes, "Hey, man, just want to let you know if we attack you, I'm going to tell you." That's not what happens. There are lots of people on these calls. I'm sure that's why it's in this book, right? There are people there. They document with notes. There's more transparency in the DOD calls than there is at anything in the Trump White House. So I feel like it's a little bit of the conjecture of probably Milley talking about these things with his staff and being very worried. But doesn't mean he went to the Chinese general and was like, "Look, man, I'll tell you if we're going to attack you." Come on. I think he was just saying, we are not in the mode of hostilities towards you right now. Lots of political rhetoric out there. Just want to let you know, this is our stance. I think the other part of it is, I'm sure, I just know from my own conversations, everybody in every department, DOJ, DHS, DOD, the Justice Department, the FBI was just trying to hold on and get through to the end, of the Trump term. And so that's what I take away from it is, Haspel, Milley, they're probably talking to each other. They're like, "Okay, man, what are we going to do if this happens? Let's not get caught off guard, and let's not get fired in the last 3 weeks."
Well, have you not seen or read Tom Clancy's The Sum of All Fears, where Ben Affleck's character created a back channel with his Russian counterpart? Yeah.
This is in every movie, all these back channels. And look, there are back channels, but not in the sense of worrying about the president, because there's another side to this coin that's not coming up in the news, right? Which is General Milley would not express weakness or turmoil to the Chinese military because they may see it as an opportunity. He would be very fearful of that. He wouldn't be like, man, everything's a shit show here, but I'm not going to attack you, but it's crazy. He would never do that because he'd be like, oh, the Chinese would be smart then to be like, you know what? It's a great time to take a prod at Taiwan, or let's take a shot at Australia, see what the Americans will do. It changes their decision calculus. I think, he was just trying to calm the waters probably to make sure that they don't get into a crazy standoff, just based on some signal of President Trump walking out and saying something crazy about China or Iran, or whichever one the coin landed on that day.
I know I got to let you go. Anything I haven't asked you about that you're banging the drum on that you want to mention?
I think the broader point of all of this is, like, despite all this huff and puff, when you look at the State Department, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, is what is our national security strategy under the Biden administration? I mean, they complained a lot about what was going on. It's been 8 months now, right? Like, time to get a plan, man. And like, I just don't feel it yet. Like, I'm not sure. I always heard about China, but if you're going to get tough on China, it's time. A nuclear submarine with Australia. Okay, whatever. Like, how about it's all about money with China. So, like, let's do it. What are we going to do? Right? Like, it's time to brief the plan. I'm not really hearing it yet.
Great point. Brings up a lot of questions. No time left. Clint Watts, always a pleasure. Thank you so much, my friend, for joining me. Great to see you.
Thanks for having me.
All right, Clint Watts at Selected Wisdom. Please let you know. Please let him know that you heard him here on the show. And always a great conversation. Love his nuanced, thoughtful perspective. And that was awesome. Thank you very much, Clint. And now let's get to our favorite ending of the week. It's the great comedian, cultural commentator, Christian Finnegan. We had a lot to talk about this week with Norm Macdonald passing away, with stupid Jim Brewer's comments on Fox, on Tucker Carlson, and a lot more that we discussed. I think you're really going to like it. As always, he's on Twitter at Christ Finnegan, ChristianFinnegan.com. Ladies and gentlemen, here we go. Okay, well, it's Friday, of course, and that means not only TGIF, but the F stands for Finnegan. I just thought of that. Christian Finnegan, hello, welcome.
Hello, Peter. How are you, sir?
I'm very happy to have you. And, of course, last week we had our first Finnegan Fridays jingle written by our own Pete Coe.
Yep,
and
it was very good.
You challenged him. I challenged him. Hey, you want to give him a different look? And I forget, your nails is something about something in the genre of The Cure, maybe?
Yeah, I said something kind of brooding and dark. I don't even know if there is such thing as a brooding jingle. It seems probably a contradictory set of words, but that is what I requested.
Okay, well, here we go. We've got it now, and this is the new jingle. This week's jingle for Finnegan Fridays, thanks to Pete Coe. Let's take a listen.
Lost in brooding sentimentality, it's Finnegan Fridays.
All right. Very literal.
Lost in brooding sentimentality, it's Finnegan Fridays.
See, it's funny because what I hear in that is more of like a Jethro Tull, kind of like 70s, like fairies in the woods, kind of the magician played his banjo, or his lyre. And
I was going to say it's got a little Jethro Tull tint, but then you said it.
Yeah, I cut you off. It was literally on the tip of your tongue.
That's awesome. Thank you,
Pete. I love it. I actually like that. That's the one I think I want to keep. I mean, I'll keep giving him assignments all day long, but I like that sort of songs from the wood quality.
If he's up for it, he'll keep doing them, and then we can just keep mixing them up. Anyway, welcome. Thank you very much for joining me. It's great to see you. Happy Friday Eve. We're talking on Thursday, but people listening on Fridays. Did you have a good week?
Is there such thing?
Well,
a good week.
Not these days, it would seem, because even if things are going fantastic in your own life, you turn on your phone or your computer, you check in with the news or your friends, you're like, oh dear, I'm so sorry that this is happening.
Yes, and even when things are going well, you're constantly looking above your head for the piano that is sure to be raining down upon you.
Well, I do know this week that former senator and comedy writer, comedian, even, I guess, Al Franken stopped by your wife's venue and did like an hour set at QED last night in Queens.
Last night.
What the hell?
Yeah, it was. I guess former Senator Franken is going on tour starting this Saturday. I think his first show was in Northampton. I'm doing his promotions now, but he was looking for a place to run his set, and he, I guess, had spoken to Gary Gulman, who said very nice things about QED, and it's kind of a low stakes, off the grid kind of deal. And so, yeah, it was kind of like a mailing list only thing. Like, it wasn't publicized. You know, he requested for it not to be publicized. So it was just for people who are on the QED mailing list. So if you're out there and you're within driving distance of New York City, now you can see the benefits of joining the QED mailing list, which you can find at QEDastoria.com.
QEDastoria.com.
Yeah, baby.
Cool.
So it was exciting, you know, and he just showed up a few minutes before he went on and hung out in our disgusting basement until showtime. So there's no real green room. It's not disgusting. It's just a basement.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was very low maintenance and did his time. Did
he have an entourage?
He had a chief of staff, which I don't really know what that means.
A lot of former politicians. I learned this when I was at CNN, and Carly Fiorina. You remember her? She was like, talk to my chief of staff. I was like, what? What the hell's that?
Yeah, what are you governing?
Yeah, so it's a thing that I think...
You've literally never held office.
People that want to be in government or have been in government, I think, have chiefs of staff, but I don't hear it in the private sector or entertainment or anything. I don't know.
No, I don't hear it, you know, from like Burger King managers and stuff. Talk to my chief of staff.
Oh, I actually do hear it at Burger King from Burger King manager. Yeah, I know.
Well, you have a very highfalutin Burger King. Yeah,
well, we do. Yes. Here in the burbs.
I believe you have to have had a Rhodes Scholarship to get a job at the Burger King in your town. Yeah,
you do. That's actually true. That's not untrue, and everything's more expensive there as well. So that's probably one reason.
Get what you pay for.
So did you talk to him?
I did. He was very polite, and you know, I was wondering whether he would really address sort of the you know, controversial aspects of the way. I mean, he definitely was very open about having left the Senate and stuff, but he really didn't touch any of that stuff, which, you know, I guess is fine. I was curious. I would have loved to have heard about it, but he had a lot of great material and a lot of great anecdotes about the Senate. He did a stunningly good Chuck Grassley impression, which is kind of one of those things where you don't really know what a Chuck Grassley impression would be until you hear it. And you're like, oh yeah, he has a very distinct way of speaking.
Well, if you do an impression of the oldest man alive, you're getting close.
Yes, the oldest man alive, if in a Coen Brothers movie. Like,
he's an Iowan, Chuck Grassley. He became a senator before Iowa was a state, if I'm not mistaken.
I believe so. I believe he is one of the original Native American tribe. I don't even know. Was Iowa a Native American word? Probably.
I don't know, but when he became a senator, I just know it's just Io. The WA was added later
they got the WA later.
Yeah. Became. So, I mean, like, I also heard this week that, it's just weird that you're telling me this, because I heard this week that there were rumors that he was thinking about running for Senate again. I mean, according to him, he put that out there, I think.
I read the same thing. And I wonder if it's just the fact that because he's out kind of on the road and probably contacting, I think people may kind of not understand how politics or entertainment works, that just the fact that he's kind of active and probably engaging in speaking in, arranging tour dates and stuff, that people assume that must be because he's running for office. And he may be, but based on what I don't want to, talk about any of his material in depth or anything, but based on what he did on stage last night, it didn't sound to me like a stump speech. It sounded much more like a comedy show / storytelling night. You know what I mean? And so there were a couple of things where it was like, well, if he's running for office, I'm not sure he would have said that.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. That's what I was thinking. I'm like, is he going to compromise himself by going around and saying certain things in this comedy act? Who knows?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what
but yeah, I mean, I would say that I'd love to see it again at the end of the tour, because obviously I'm seeing it as he's just kind of ramping up and getting sort of whipping stuff into shape. And as a comic, you can always see it even when it's not fully formed yet. Do you know what I mean? You can see the fingers and the toes before they're fully apparent. And so it's, it's always fun. It's both depressing and exciting to know that you can be in this business or, be 70 years old and have spent the majority of your life in this business, and you still have to go through the same process.
Right.
New material is always new material. And, but yeah, so it was fun.
That's awesome. That's so cool. Yeah. We've got Christian Finnegan, who was just with former Senator Al Franken, The Power. Very, very influential. So another thing I wanted to play for you to get your reaction to, I thought of you right away because when I saw this clip, it was very strange. I don't understand. I don't know a lot about music. I love music. I love to listen to music, but I don't really talk about it. I don't understand. I like to listen to other people talk about it to some extent. But the Daily Wire is the Ben Shapiro network, and they got a bunch of right-wing white people, including the horrific Matt Walsh. We don't hear him in this clip, but in this clip that I'm going to play, one of the guys says that Barack Obama, I think it's in context. Let me just play it and get your reaction on the other side. Here we go.
Rock and roll's over. You're still talking about rock and roll as though Barack Obama didn't happen. Honestly, it's for another day, but Barack Obama destroyed rock and roll.
You have convinced me of this.
There was rock and roll, then there was Barack Obama. Now there is no rock and roll.
Yep.
So
he did something good.
But because rock and roll was about white male angst. White male teenage angst.
Yeah.
And then Barack Obama came along
stealing a lot
and
of
said
its tropes from better black music.
Yeah, really.
Well, Barack Obama came along and said young white men aren't allowed to have angst.
Yeah.
They're not allowed to basically express their dissatisfaction because they're so
toxic.
Yeah. And so truly rock and roll just stopped.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Okay. First of all, is rock and roll about white male angst? Is there a nugget of any truth there?
Certainly there are genres of rock music that are, first of all, I kind of avoided getting into this online because that it's the sort of outrage and dunking is sort of the oxygen that allows these dummies to breathe.
Right.
So part of me I don't want to get sanctimonious about it. Like, we shouldn't retweet these people and don't play, people, whatever. We all want to make, but there was part of me that kind of was just like, I'm just going to leave this one alone. It's like, this is bait, and you're trying to, you're saying something dumb and provocative, knowing that it will garner engagement. And it works. It's of course the kind of dumb that can only happen when sort of four uncritical dude bros are talking amongst each other. Nobody in that room was going to call, because you can see that even the other guys in the room, even the guy who said, yeah, that's true, none of them really buy it. They all just kind of want to move on. It's just kind of like, yeah, sure. Absolutely. Sure. Moving on. Because it's a dumb premise from about 10 different angles. First of all, calling it rock and roll. Rock and roll is Chuck Berry and Jerry Lee Lewis and Elvis Presley. Rock is something different. You know what I mean? Like, nobody would have called Rage Against the Machine rock and roll. You know what I mean? Like, hey, I love this new rock and roll band, Radiohead. You know what I mean? These are
right. So
you've already kind of cornified yourself from the beginning. And obviously, as everyone online was saying, it's, you're completely ignoring that rock and roll was a black music to begin with. And some might say appropriated, others would say just, that rock music sprung from the fountain of sort of black music. I don't think that's deniable. It's pretty well documented at this point. But beyond that, even, you're talking about Barack Obama, who literally does a podcast with Bruce Springsteen.
Is Bruce Springsteen, his music, a product of his white male angst?
Yeah. If the term rock and roll applies to anyone, I think it applies to Bruce Springsteen. But that's not what these guys are talking about. Right. They're talking about rock music dominating the charts. They're talking about, the time when you could turn on, put on the top 40 or whatever, and it would be all white guy bands. And judging by these guys' age, I'm thinking probably like Korn, Rage Against the Machine, 311. They're probably into those dumb bands. I actually like Rage Against the Machine, but that's probably what they're thinking of. Never mind that a lot of that music they probably are thinking of as rock music was really like rap rock, which was already infused with rap music to begin with. But the trend they're talking about began way before Barack Obama came on the scene. And I would say, honestly, if you want to make any argument, you could say that Barack Obama is a symptom of the same trend that has led rock music off of the charts. More so than that Barack Obama caused rock and roll to not be popular anymore. I would say that the entire culture was moving away from a solely white male perspective, and that Barack Obama is a product. Product's a better word than symptom. That Barack Obama is as much a product of that as, Drake having all top 10 on the top 10 charts right now.
I guess, I don't want to belabor it too much, but it is kind of interesting and easy to talk about for me. I just don't really, I don't understand. I don't understand what they mean. Barack Obama,
because it's presented uncritically. There's no, it's so, like I said, I just wish there was just somebody who would have provided any pushback. So Barack Obama said that white guys can't be angry. When did he say that? When? Like, show me one instance, like literally one instance of anything Barack Obama said or did that implied that white people couldn't express their dissatisfaction with the state of the world.
But if he did, it would produce more art or whatever you want to call it. Like it could make white people angrier if he said, like, everything comes out of something. And if he had said, like, how could you kill a thing? I just don't understand what they mean. The bottom line is that somebody tweeted something very simple, which is they miss him so much.
Oh, of course they do. Of course they do. And, they play this game all the time where on the one hand, they'll say that some Democratic president or Democratic politician is ineffectual and weak. And but then at the same time, they run the world and they completely mold popular culture to their whim. Right. You know what I mean? Like, it can't be both at the same time. I would that Barack Obama was that powerful. But listen, I understand that for a certain age white dude, it probably is disconcerting to them that rock is no longer the dominant musical art form. It's a bummer to me. It's a bummer to me.
Maybe that's it. Like, he popularized black music by listening to it, talking about it, putting out playlists, having them to the White House. Maybe it's
I mean, I guess, does anybody, is literally anybody deciding what music to buy based on what the president listens to?
Well, let me ask you, for a more thoughtful, a more thoughtful question is music is so much more accessible. Everything is so much more accessible and affordable. And has art to some extent not flattened. Anybody can go find whatever album they want or more importantly, be introduced to new music much easier than they would have been when we were growing up. Is that fair to say, given Spotify?
Well, sure. It's much more like trying to find a needle in a haystack now, as opposed to kind of being spoon-fed. People will talk about how, like, pop music, they're just telling you what to listen to, or they're, much less so than at any time I've been alive. That's why Drake can have all top 10. That, like, literally the top 10 on Spotify right now is all Drake songs.
Oh, wow.
But it's because he just released an album. And so it's all the songs on that album, because the way algorithms work now, it's not like you release a single and that's the only song that most people hear. Now it's like, it's whatever you're playing on your Spotify. So if you're playing that Drake album on repeat over and over and over and over again, those are the songs that are going to rise to the top of the pop charts, even though only one of them might be the quote unquote single. Whereas, our entire lives, a band would put out a single maybe a month or two before, maybe a few weeks before an album came out. And then that would be the song that you knew. And then when the album came out, they'd put out a second single, and that would be the song because there would be a video for it. It's just, it doesn't function like that anymore. And the idea that rock, that rock and roll doesn't exist anymore, it displays to me such a laziness and weakness of imagination. There is so much rock music being made right now. So much. Is it dominating the top 40 charts? Of course it's not. It's entering, it's not jazz, but it's on its way. It's the same thing as happening to guitar-based rock and roll music that happened to jazz. That at one point it was the dominant form of popular music, and then it sort of recedes into sort of a niche genre. Now, I wouldn't call rock as niche as jazz, but it's headed in that direction. I would say guitar-based rock music right now is probably a midpoint between jazz music and what you're going to see by, Rita Ora or whatever, Ariana Grande, the baby, whatever's on the top 10 that week. Guitar-based rock music is probably somewhere in the middle there.
But the other thing is, I grew up in an all white upstate New York town, and you found music because the radio, MTV, or in my case, your friends. My brother introduced me to a lot of like different stuff, alternative stuff, if you will. But most of my friends, we were listening to all the same stuff. But then I went to college. I mean, I didn't listen to any black artists, I think, at all. I mean, certainly not hip hop. I went to college and I was introduced to hip hop, and I was like, ugh, I don't like any of this until they just hammered me over the head with it because my roommate played it constantly, and I finally slowly began to like certain artists. But the point is, it was about exposure and accessibility then, and now that's just not the case. And maybe it seems like a lot of other things that certainly a lot of white folks I find, and maybe black and brown, I don't know if it's a racial thing, but as you get older, you get upset that the thing that you grew up with, whether it be art or music or even the school that you went to, is going away, is being minimized. It upsets you. That's okay. That's understandable. I think That's a normal human reaction, that the thing that you grew up with is maybe not as popular, but it's not. There's nothing wrong with it.
You're trying to take sort of generational these sort of forces that are bigger than all of us.
Yeah.
And trying to pin them on a guy. You know what I mean?
Yes.
These things were happening before Barack Obama. They will continue to happen afterwards. Music will continue to change and evolve. That's just the way it works.
So let's go from music to comedy. This week, we lost two legends, Norm Macdonald and Jim Breuer. So
I see what you did.
Oh, I wrote that. What do we want to say about Norm?
Well, it's funny. In a way, I wouldn't say that I've enjoyed the past few days, because obviously it's tragic that he passed, and and et cetera and so forth. But it has been kind of fun to just sort of rewatch all those clips that you laughed at the time. The one that I had kind of forgotten about that is super uncomfortable to watch in a good way is when he hosted the ESPYs years ago and, did 10 minutes of very brutal Norm Macdonald type jokes in front of the least humor capable people in the world. Professional athletes have the worst sense of humor.
Well, because I think, just to interject there, I've always thought athletes, famous people, affluent people, but certainly back to athletes, they have a hard time laughing at themselves. And yes. I think, if I recall, he was making fun of them, which is appropriate. That's right. That's what you should do. You should make.
But they have no notion of self-deprecation.
Right.
Or, and I get it. When you're a professional athlete, your life is about moving forward, working hard, achieving my goals. It has to be. I get that. But for the rest of us, it's I farted. Haha. That's not really the way a professional athlete thinks. They're not sort of taking the piss out of themselves or of situations. They're basically self-help books. They're walking self-help books. But to watch, and of course the ones that are world famous, and every single time you'd be whenever John Elway's here, and they'd all clap. Don't you know what's coming? Don't you know what's coming?
Right.
This is not going to be complimentary to John Elway, or I don't know, not him specifically, but whoever he was calling out in the audience. It just joke after joke. For the first couple, it's all right, well, they don't get it. But it's at a certain point, you should understand what's coming down the pike. And so, I mean, I enjoy that. Of course, then the Bob Saget roast, which everybody sent around, where he kind of bombed on purpose. I had sort of a slightly different take on it. I mean, I've watched it probably 10 times, and it's delicious to watch. But I will say that I felt frustrated on behalf of the other comedians on the dais there. because I don't like it when I'm on a show. I've done like basic cable, like panel comedy shows where somebody is subverting the premise and kind of doing an ironic take on it and it makes you look like such a fucking suck up dweeb because, you know, you're the one playing along and they're the one undercutting the whole thing. And so I looking around at like Greg Giraldo and Brian Posehn and other people. I was like, I would hate to have to follow that. And you get up with your real jokes after someone's just sort of made a mockery of the entire evening. That said, it's hilarious, and I've watched it 10 times.
So let me ask you about, well, last thing on did you know Norm?
I did not. I do want to mention one thing about Norm, and I feel, and I hate that we have to do this now, but I do think we have to do this. Is, you know, there were a couple of women on social media, comedians, who mentioned that they had been sexually harassed by Norm in the past, you know, on the road, like opening for him on the road. I don't want to, like, it's very findable on Twitter. And that it was apparently kind of not an unusual thing for waitresses at comedy clubs to deal with that. And we have to accept people in all of their truths.
I absolutely. I think that's really super important. Everybody's complex. Everybody, you know, does things that are either inappropriate or bad, and those things should be remembered too, because otherwise, you know, the people who are on the losing end of them, kind of their voices aren't heard. I think that's super important. So
yeah, I mean, I definitely, you know, whenever somebody that has been a dick to me personally becomes famous or becomes beloved of the culture, and there are 3 or 4, it is always a weird thing. It's always a weird feeling for me to sit in. It's like, we love person X. It's like, well, person X was a huge fucking dick to me.
That's how I felt early on about your success.
Well, luckily it didn't last, so it wasn't. You didn't have to endure it for too long.
I'm so glad you peaked.
Yes,
and that I never did. That's hilarious. No, I think it was more about like your hair that really bothered me a lot, because I was, you know, I started out with good hair, and you kept it. And you just kept going. Yours kept getting better. Mine fell out. So I think that was
I don't think you've ever had hair. I think you were born bald. You've stayed bald.
I mean, I've got a headshot progression I'm now going to send to you as proof, but I feel like you're still going to say this is not real.
Well, you wore a rug. It was a toupee. You were in 4th grade and you had a toupee.
My dad wore a rug.
Your dad wore a rug. When did he finally take it off? Like, was it one day?
I want to say he wore it for like maybe 5 or 10 years, and he wore it part time, only when he went to work. He was an insurance salesman, but he didn't wear it like socially or anywhere else.
Well, I could see that if you feel like it helps you make the sale. That's what people trust a guy with hair.
Yeah, that's what he thought. I think.
I bet that people do trust a guy with hair, but I think that people trust a guy with a toupee even less than a bald person.
You're not wrong about that. He got a toupee and a Corvette around the same time too. So you
sounds about right.
Psychoanalyze that if you want. So Jim Brewer, what is he? I have a lot to say about him. I haven't said anything really. He actually reached out to me on Saturday. I haven't heard from him in years. And
you knew him from Sirius, I assume.
Yeah. And where he was never great to me, or he was actually even did a few terrible things on air to me. And he went off on me one day. I'll never forget. I was driving home, and he just went. I did the the noon show. There was only 2 live shows. There are 2 shows.
This is on which channel?
On the Raw Dog when I first started the comedy channel, and he was there already when I got hired, and he was always like, I always looked up to him. He's always one of my, I don't know, one of my favorites. I knew of him. I knew of his work.
He's a celebrity. He's a guy you'd heard of.
Yeah, I'd opened for him once at a college, and he didn't talk to me, and I was pretty hurt by that, but whatever. So I'm driving home, and I'm listening to Sirius, and he's savaging me, saying that I said something disrespectful. I didn't even say anything. Like, someone told him that I said something that I didn't say. And I remember
about him.
Yeah, about him. And I remember why would I ever do that? And I remember being hurt at first. And then I just started smiling ear to ear. I was like, Jim Brewer's talking about me. How could that be bad? And then I felt fine. And then we never really clicked that much. Whatever. But anyway, but we were always cool. He'd reached out to me later on to do a few different things, and I'd always kept kind of in contact with him randomly. And I became a bigger fan of his stand-up in the last few years, actually. I liked some of the things that he was doing. And anyway, he texted me over the weekend. He's like, fuck your shot. Jim Brewer, I see, come in my phone. Well, I haven't seen his name come in my phone in 10 years, 5 years. Fuck your shot. I go, what? I was like, is he talking about the vaccine? Like, what's he talking about? And the only other thing I'd say about him is that his wife...
Did he respond? Did you respond?
He then told me all this crazy anti-vax stuff.
But why you? Like, what? He's just going through his phone. And like,
I don't know. I think I started a TikTok account last week. I don't want to brag, and
making a lot of buzz. My wife loved the egg one.
Right. That was my daughter's idea. But so I did like a one less than 1 minute rant about get the shot or something, and maybe it was that. I don't know.
Did you mention him?
No, I hadn't thought of him in years.
So weird.
So it was totally random, and then he went off on it, and I was like, dude, whatever. You can say whatever you want to me. We're always going to be cool, is what I said to him. I was like, I don't want to fucking beef with this guy. He's just texting me like, what is this? And I would have never mentioned it on the podcast or publicly, but then he went crazy publicly. So anyway, his wife was always super, super, really like very religious, like almost bizarrely Christian. And he wasn't really on the same page with her, but I think maybe he then did get on that page with her, and he really went down kind of some conspiracy routes. I think maybe. And I know
somebody had mentioned that she is very sick, that apparently she has cancer, was what someone on Twitter had said.
Oh,
and
yeah.
so, somebody had made a very funny joke about Brewer's appearance, and I had retweeted it, and somebody was like, come on, give him a break. Like, his wife is dying of, his wife has cancer or whatever. And, so setting that aside, I don't know if that, taking care of someone who is very, very, very ill, frays the nerves and might make you a little more irrational than you might otherwise be. I don't want to assume that has anything to do with it, but it wouldn't be unheard of if that was true.
The thing that's interesting about him to me is that he never wanted to talk politics. It was banned from his radio show at SiriusXM, no politics. And that was a fun thing to do, because they talked about everything else as kind of a podcast. Him and Pete Correale kind of did a fun show before podcasts. And, I wasn't particularly a huge fan of it, but that's what they did. They didn't talk politics, and there could be nothing more. Maybe it's not political. I don't know. I think it's very political, what he said. But regardless, it's very political. And the determination to not talk politics is political. You know what I mean? Banning politics is a political act. And I trust me, I know so many shows where politics is banned, podcasts or radio shows. And they're I can't think of one that has that rule that isn't hosted by a white guy. And you know what I mean? There's no black women out there being like, we can't talk about politics on our show. Like, they just don't exist. That's a great point. And the final thing I would say about that is that when I went from the 1 hour daily show at SiriusXM to hosting my 3 hour show, it was like the biggest deal in the world for me, really, because I was getting health care, and it was like a big deal. It was a 3 hour show. It was a major, it was the biggest break, the best thing I'd ever done. And they had me on Raw Dog, I was still on that channel as well, to promote my new show. And I was like, oh, this is awesome. You know what they did? They fucking sandbagged me. They said, you don't know anything about politics. And then they asked me all these very specific questions about politics. Like, they wrote them ahead of time. And they're like, who's on the nickel? And all kinds of... What, Jim and Pete? Jim and Pete. They just completely sandbagged me. And then every time they would see me, they would make fun of me. They're like, you're quitting comedy. You're becoming, politics. And I was like, I'm not doing what are you why are you doing this to me? Like, they hated that I was growing, that I was succeeding, a lot of people did there to me. And it was really, really hurtful at the time to me. Yeah. I mean, there's always going to be a kind of a tall grass syndrome in comedy, and especially, and I mean, I feel it too. I mean, I feel it towards people like Jim Brewer and a lot of our sort of fellow comedians who are avowedly apolitical, and now they're hosting shows on Fox News Radio and stuff. It's like, what? You were the guy making jokes about, like, cab drivers and stuff like that. And now you're opining of, you're talking about the estate tax. Like, where did this come from? Yep. Part of it is just getting older. I mean, obviously, I think that we all start to care more about these things as we're, first of all, just because we're more interested in the news in general, but also as we are less and less relevant in the world of popular culture.
a lot of that attention then switches over to politics and social issues and things like that.
I don't think that was, as a lot of people think, say that it was a cynical wager. And I think this is an important kind of thing to try to analyze that.
No, I don't think it was I don't think it's like a literal thing. Like, I'm going to steer into this. I think it is a natural thing that happens. Comedians go where the attention is. Do you know what I mean? And it's like they have this heat-seeking desire within them to sort of just get applause and to get laughs, to get attention. And I think that for a certain variety, especially of aging white dude, who once they instinctively feel that they're not getting that attention from young multiracial crowds, they're just not getting it. They don't want Jim Breuer. And I don't say that as an insult to Jim Breuer. By and large, they don't want me either. You know what I mean? And so it's very tempting to want to steer in to where I think Sarah Silverman said something like that on her podcast about how people like Louis C.K. or whatever, like if we don't give them an off ramp or a way to come back into the good graces, that people go where the love is. And so if the only love they're getting is from sort of angry, middle-aged white dudes or whatever, that's where they're going to steer their act. And so to me, especially, and I think the pandemic really sped up that process for a lot of dudes. Without the sort of daily comedy club sets or road gigs to sort of be in front of groups of semi-diverse or just live human beings, without being able to get that real world tactile love coming back from a group of people, you start having to seek it out by being angry or by being provocative, by starting to light fires. I mean, because if you can't get people laughing at stories about your dropping your kid off at soccer practice, because a lot of his comedy, from what I understand, was mostly domestic based.
Yep.
If you're not, first of all, that's not the kind of stuff that gets traffic on social media at all. It does well in a physical room, but it doesn't do well on a podcast. Nobody wants to hear it on a podcast, and nobody wants to hear it. Nobody wants to read it on Twitter or Facebook. So you start steering into the things that will get you attention. And I don't think it's a conscious decision. I think it is just a natural thing that happens.
Do you think there's a market for live performers that for unvaccinated audiences versus vaccinated audiences? Like, do you think that could be a cynical ploy for any musician or comedian to say, kind of as he did, and I think Clapton did, and others, like, I'm not going to perform at these venues that demand that you get a shot?
Again, I don't think that it's a conscious cynicism. Cynicism undergirds it, but I think it feels very natural. It feels, it allows you to feel like a bad boy in a way that most 58 or however old, I don't know how old Jim Breuer is, probably in his mid 50s, I'm guessing. You don't get to feel very cutting edge when you're above 40 in America. But being anti-vax or being anti-mask, it is in a weird way, it makes you feel dangerous and provocative again. And that's a very attractive thing. And so, again, I don't think it's somebody literally is like, I'm going to be provocative. It just, you miss feeling like you're edgy. And that's the only way for a guy like that to feel edgy now.
Funny how some of these any of these kind of right-wingy comedians or ex-SNL guys, I think you did tweet something about, something about Chris Kattan, who's also...
Well, because Jim Breuer had talked a lot of shit about Chris Kattan when they left SNL.
Oh, really?
Specifically, that I guess they really hated each other on SNL. And Jim Breuer and it's funny because back then I was on Jim Brewer's side. We're basically talking about that Chris Kattan had really wanted to just be a celebrity and wasn't like didn't want to hang out and be friendly or something like that. But yeah, anyway, Chris Kattan and him apparently were like oil and water.
Finally on this, and this is not only Jim Breuer saying this, but Breuer made a point about segregation. He said, this is segregation. And that triggered me. So I was so outraged by that. Segregation should and should always be about, the immutable characteristics that we have, the color of your skin, your gender. That's what historically segregation in this country, in any country, is. That's how we talk about that word. And the idea that you're being segregated because of a choice that you made to get a shot or not get a shot, I find that really deeply offensive. That's bullshit.
Of course, it's, everyone knows that the term segregation is shorthand for racial segregation.
Yeah.
That is what the term segregation means.
Everywhere, I think.
We are, in terms of non-racial segregation, we are non-racially segregated 10 times a day in a myriad of ways. If you're not wearing shoes, you are segregated out of the restaurant. Do you know what I mean? That it's like we just accept that there are rules, and that there are rules that are designed to provide the most safety and comfort for the most amount of people. And that sometimes that works in our favor and sometimes it doesn't. No, I mean, again, it's like these people, these sort of kings of the world, the middle-aged white dudes who've always felt like the default position for everything. For the first time, they're feeling like, wait, but why doesn't my opinion hold sway anymore? Like, why are these people, you hear it all the time. And I've heard so many of my dude friend comedians say, it's like, I agree with liberal. And I may have said this before, so I apologize if I'm being redundant, but they say, I agree with Democrats on 90% of the things, but then they just go too far. It's like, no, what you're saying is, I agree with liberals and Democrats the 90% of the time that it doesn't require me to change anything.
Well, yes. You could say that every week. You could say that every week.
The minute I have to adapt my behavior or language or whatever, that's too far. That's too far.
Yep. I think I'm guilty of that because I don't want these Afghan refugees in my community.
You said that. I mean, I don't know if all the signs in your lawn were as necessary, but.
Finally, Christian Finnegan, what you watching? What you listening to? What you recommending to the stand-up listeners this week? Anything?
I am watching The Leftovers right now. Did I say this last week? I may have said this last week.
I think you did. I think because I mentioned it to my wife. Yeah,
I'm still watching that, and it is very good, but there are a lot of things that if it's only 3 seasons, and I'm just about to start season 3, and there are a lot of dangling plot lines that if they are not wrapped up in a satisfactory way, I will be annoyed. I have been told that season 3 is a magnificent season of television, so I have high hopes, but there's a lot of stuff that you can write away because it's just like, hey man, this show is weird things happen, which to me is often a mask for lazy storytelling. I think that's what a lot of people have thought about Lost, which is the same guy who created The Leftovers. And so I'm very much enjoying it, but I'm enjoying it with an asterisk at the moment. That is what I would say. In terms of music, there's a great song out right now by a band called Snail Mail. It just came out yesterday. It's just one young woman, and I think it's a great. If I was a teenager, it would be the song I probably listened to in the dark with the lights out, feeling like it's called Valentine. And I think it's a really great sort of sad pop song. That's so I would recommend people check that out. All right, buddy. We'll let us play it out.
Thank you very much, Christian.
All right, dude. Have a good day.
Careful in that room. Those parasitic cameras, don't they stop?
All right, we'll give John Carroll a rest for the first time ever and listen to Christian Finnegan's recommendation, Snail Mail, Valentine. I love you guys. Have an awesome weekend. Thank you so much for your support.